it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single woman in love with period dramas will not only make her husband a costume, but will make herself a matching one. Welcome to part 2 of Womageddon, which I'm just going to call my entire ever after build at this point. That's going to include my parts because why not? Thematic, theming, everything. Hello my bookhoes and welcome to Bookhoarding by Bianca. I'm Bianca and today I'm going to talk to you really quickly about making this very basic camicia. If you missed my first video, I am making an ever after couples costume for myself and my husband. I am calling it Womageddon because I'm going to make him Prince Henry's leather whams looking attire. And I'm going to make myself the blue library outfit. But of course we must start with our base layers. I'm also going to be using some terminology around like men's wear, women's wear sometimes. And what I really mean is it's traditional, like historically referred to as that. But I don't prescribe to that need to be gender enforced at all. Like I put this on and just wore this all day because this was really fun. So to put this really basic camicia together, I used a bunch of resources that actually were, some of them I had to use the Internet Archive to even access anymore, but they were really, really good, and so I'm going to link them below in my blog post so that you have them. And then I also have included some of the pattern images just so that they exist, and like I have a citation for them, but I just, in case anything happens and like those go away, I want to make sure people have them. And then I also have included information on how I measured myself and what I did for those measurements to make the pattern pieces. So if you want to make your own based on how I did mine, and or any of the other people that I use their research on, you can do that. In terms of materials for this, I really just used the fabric. I used cotton that is a linen look cotton that I got during my LA Fashion District visit. I had about 10 yards of it, and I used 9 yards between this and this. So I don't remember the width measurement, but that hopefully gives you some help in terms of how much material you'll need. You can see here there's a ton of gathering. And I do have a bunch of scrap pieces left over. This is a lot more linear than this piece because you're just cutting out big like squares and rectangles. I chose to just add an internal little stay piece here to keep this in place, and then on the outside it looks gathered and cute. I eventually will add probably a second little piece of cloth on the outside that has a little minimal black work along it. You can see here too, I'd made my own little black work piece. I read in one of the pieces I was looking at that everyone in the household had a different kind of embroidery on their clothing, so that people who couldn't read, who were cleaning their clothes, would recognize whose garments belonged to who. And while I will be the person cleaning all of these things, I thought it was a cute touch to have my embroidery be a little different than my husband's. So I will say that this is really easy to come together, but the biggest I think drawback of all this is when you're working with all white fabric, all fabric of one color, it can be really hard to know what's top and bottom for these long pieces. So I'd say don't be afraid to use the iron off pens or the tailor's chalk, just so that you know what's top, what's bottom. Sometimes I even pin a little post-it to the top of something just so that I know before I'm sewing. Okay, with that, let's get into the build. Again, I try to label these very carefully. So you can see here, I just pinned that, it says sleeve top, so I pinned that to the sleeve top. And you can see here too, well, the gussets, you don't need a top or bottom, but I just think that's a really good tip for working with this. You can also use fabric stuff, fabric tapes and stuff. And then I'm trying to show you here that like the gusset goes in this area, this seam. So you're gonna basically sew up to that amount like I did there, and then insert the gusset. And again, depending on the seam finishing that you do, this might be a slightly different process for you, slightly different steps, but I think these are 9x9 gussets. So I just sewed the sleeve seam up to 9 inches. I did a back stitch at that 9-inch mark for reinforcement, since I would be working with this open seam. And now I'm just pinning this into that space. So a gusset is essentially in this time, we don't have curved, like, armholes and things, arm sides. And sleeves are just very different. And because they're just a kind of tube, you need something here to help give you movement. Because if you just have a tube, you look like those little tube things outside of, like, car dealerships. And you need to be able to move your arms. So gussets are that thing. Gussets are used in other places in historical fashion too. But I think this is really a fun and good little sampler, if you will, a little starter if you've never worked with them, because it's a pretty big one. I feel like for my Regency one, it was smaller. Oh, you can see here, I'm pointing to then the pins, pinning this to the chemise, or camicia body. It's like a little complicated to explain, so I hope the diagrams help, because the gusset and part of the sleeve are getting sewn to the front, and then you're kind of like inserting that gusset sleeve piece into the camicia body, much like you did the gusset into the sleeve. And you can see there too, the gusset seam doesn't line up exactly to the edge of the camicia bodice top. There's like 4 inches, I think, difference. So then once you sew all of that together, I leave mine to hang overnight. I know it wasn't cut on the bias, and that it was literally like ripped at grain line, but I still really, really prefer to leave things to hang overnight. The reason that you do that, for anybody who doesn't know, specifically for skirts and dresses, it helps hang the stretch essentially out of the piece, so that when you do go and hem it, it will be correct. And you can actually see here, I like to show that there was just a ton of body here. Like, if you saw how many layers there were, like, I had to pin all those back and forth onto that dress form. And then this is the next day. So again, like, what you do is you essentially let a hem hang overnight, and then you can hem it more confidently. But, for this, it was just a straight of grain, so it wasn't like it had a ton of stretch. But if you're working with bias, you might want to just measure. There are multiple ways to do this, but you want to measure, make sure it's even looking. Okay, this is fun. I actually wanted to show an attempt at something. So I have a gathering foot that I got, and I did a little test strip, and I thought it looked okay. And then I ran it along the bodice neckline, and I didn't really like how it worked for this. It needed a lot more, and I had played with it, and it was on my, I guess, longest stitch length. I just need to play with this more. I hadn't used this foot ever until that day. So what I did was I did 2 basting stitches, like an inch apart from each other or something, and then you can see here I'm just pulling the gathers. It's a tedious process to do this, but I think it does look really cool, really effective. You can obviously do this closer or farther for the neckline, depending on how much kind of like neck ruff you want. And in the resources I shared, some people just enclose this seam, enclose these ruffles, excuse me, I have the hiccups. But you just, you can enclose those if you'd like. I chose not to. I want to put a little bit of, again, black work on the outside, but you can see here, I'm trying to get these gathers all the way to the back of this camicia. And it's kind of funny. It's kind of, like, it takes me so long to just get these that you kind of lose a little along the way. It's a long process. And of course, like, you want to keep it as even as you can. So, like, there's constantly kind of holding up and adjusting and making sure that, like, the front and the back, if you're doing a front and back, right? Like, you can also choose to just kind of have it be generic and scooch it forward or back depending on what you're wearing. I think it can be pretty forgiving, personally. If you do want to kind of have a designated back or front, obviously you'll probably put more gathers in the back to kind of get it up tight and closer to your neckline in the back versus your front, where you probably want to have it a little bit lower for the lower bodice and everything. Okay, so we're getting into my favorite part of all this, and if you saw my last video, you know that I really dug this part for my husband's thing. So I ironed this, I steamed ironed the linen look cotton, and now I'm starching it. Why? It's because I need to embroider this, and this fabric is fairly slippery. When I first starch a thing, I just do the kind of up and down thing. And then once my iron kind of isn't sticking to it and it's dried a second on the fabric, I can then just smoothly go over and get that starch dried in there. And so I think it's really helpful. You can see here, it's already looking a little bit stiffer. I think it's helpful to do a layer of starch on this before you embroider it, because it really helps. You can see the difference there between the starched and unstarched side. I think it just super helps for embroidering this so that you don't have to have interfacing or stabilizer. And so this is me using my machine to make fake black work. And what I did was I looked through museum collections. I looked at some books. I just went all over and I found what kind of basic stitches there were. And then I looked at what was on my machine. And I personally really dug the leaves and the flowers that you could do. If you're doing this, you can mark out with any of your favorite fabric marking tools a more precise grid and try to make sure it kind of, starts the stitch at the same place every time you go back and forth on this. Starts the pattern so it 100% matches. I didn't do that. I don't think someone's going to get close enough to count that and look. But you can see here, I really dig this. I think it looks really nice. There's a kind of weird, the way that it kind of geometrically stitches, I think actually works really perfectly for the way black work's supposed to look. Anyway, I just sewed this around the cuff and gathered the cuff, and that was it. I feel like I'm swimming in this, but it'll be wonderful, glorious when I finally get it on. So here is my finished camicia. Camicia? See, like, I am Latino, so we say camicia or camisa, but this is not, so I don't know, so I'm doing my best here. Overall, I think this is very cool, very romantic. In my little notations about my directions, I did note that I followed the directions that gave this extra length. I believe it was 12 inches extra length, so that I could do really puffy sleeves and pull them out. Since I'm making the library outfit, I really do need that amount of fabric. In Ever After, in the scene after the library when they're on the way home, we do see a better look at her under things, and the little like poofs are kind of pre-built in. I'm not gonna do that, I don't think. At first I was, but I think if I want to use this for other costumes and other dresses, I probably shouldn't do that. Look at all of the body I have. I mean, like, I just want to have dresses that are like this. Like, can I just have all of my day dresses be just like this from now on? This is what I want. I say that as if I can't sew my own things. Overall, I think this is really fun. I really dig it. I like that I double enforced the gussets, which are like the underarm parts, which are gonna get a lot of wear, but also like are gonna get sweaty. I really, really like the little black work pieces I put on here. I know that that's not necessarily period accurate. If you watched my previous video about this, I talked a little bit like, I know it's not like accurate to the exact timey-wimey stuff and even the costumes of Ever After, but if I'm going to be reusing these for rent fairs, I want to have a little bit of a cuteness to go along with it. And again, eventually I will add a little bit here Probably not this year, but probably in a bit. But overall, I really like how this came along. I think it's really terrifying sometimes to use the little like diagrams, like cut a square this big, cut a rectangle this big. But it's heartening to know that like this isn't like rocket science. Like you can figure it out. Just take your time and walk yourself through it. And I think to know that like any seam finishings like can work for you. Like you can French seam things, you can flat fell things. It's gonna be a little fiddly, especially with the gusset and the way that it goes in. I did mock French seams for mine, which TBD on that if that was a good choice. But overall, I think it's really cool. It's very romantic. It's very flowy and very nice. So, highly recommend if you want to do this. So we have talked about making this and how to make it and my notes on it. And now I must go and do some thesis work because I actually should finish my senior collection. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you'd like to throw me a little bit of money over on Patreon or Ko-fi, that would be wonderful. Patrons actually get early access and have had early access to a lot of my resources and research and my progress on this Ever After costume build. So if you join, you'll get access to that. Thank you so much for joining me, and don't forget to make it so.